So let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to week 5, lesson 1. Thank you guys so much for being here with us here today. We're going to go ahead and get started with the first slide here. Give me just 1 second. So welcome back, guys. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Some pointers for this week are going to be: don't miss your discussion questions. Make sure to catch up with your assignments and be ready to take the exam. The exam will be sent out next week. Practice React. If you're still having trouble understanding it, if you can't get MongoDB installed, here's a different way to do it, doing it on the cloud. You might run into Mongo install error. If you do, please let us know so we can help. There's a few that we just covered kind of earlier. If you get a error connection refused later, you'll be using a different number. When we get there, we will let you know what that is, okay? And then next is don't focus on the MongoDB shell commands, focus on Mongoose, okay? Perfect. Some housekeeping, guys. We covered Express on Thursday and focused on understanding CRUD, the create, read, update, and delete, and request with their appropriate verbs. If you guys remember, we were not connected to a database. So the way we did it is we created an array inside of the server, and that's where we saved our information. If you remember, every time we restarted the server, we had to recreate all of the users, which was a pain, right? Very difficult to do. And imagine if you have a huge company and you keep creating all these users, and every time that the server restarts, the power went down, whatever the case may be, you lose all of your users, right? That would not be a good decision for a company. Of course, you'd lose all the data, you'd lose all this information that you need over each specific user, okay? That's essentially what we covered last time. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of tie it all together. So we had created, these different routes, these different endpoints that when we request information from the specific endpoint, we're able to receive a message or even receive some data back. Today, we actually get to tie it all together. Last time we created the users on state that is just reset once the server resets. Now we're going to create it in a database, okay? In a database, even if the server was to crash and then turn back on later, the database will still hold the data, and so you won't lose any information, okay? That's what we're going to be doing today. And the question might be, well, what database are we doing? What are we using? What's going on? Is it SQL? What's going on? We're going to be using MongoDB, right? No SQL, not only SQL, right? MongoDB and Mongoose is what we'll be using. Some of you guys have already got the chance to play with it, and so that you'll be a little bit familiar with that, okay? Let's take a look at our schedule, see where we're at. Excuse me. We are on week 5. Week 5, we are on Tuesday. So taking a look at what needs to be covered today is just kind of MongoDB talks about installing on Atlas or installing MongoDB Atlas, which is on cloud. Definitely, I would definitely take a look at that. I think it's very important to know how to do this, especially later when you start creating your own applications. If you create your own, creating on the cloud, I think would probably be your best option, just because in terms of being able to just reach out to that specific database, pay a little bit more, and they'll be able to be the ones that extend the server and are able to grow it for you. The next thing is tomorrow we have Express and Mongoose commands. That's your reading at the end of the day. You have to have the jokes API complete. After today, you honestly should have that jokes API in the bag. No problems there, okay? And then starting on Thursday, really exciting thing about Thursday, guys, is we start our first section of our test prep. Okay, so super cool. I'm super excited about that. You guys should be too, because it's our test prep, guys. It's our test prep to prep you for this exam so you can get the belt and belt this exam no problem. Okay. We started out on Thursday. It carries on to next week. We're going to Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So essentially the entire time we talk about the full stack, right? So we're going to be working with the front end. We're going to be working with the back end. We're going to be connecting it all together. We're going to run into some errors and fix those errors, work on those errors, understand these errors, and then hopefully get all prepped up for Friday, which is when you will get the code. Now remember, to get the code, you have to have 90% of your core assignments completed. Okay, so that being said, it does give you a number, but honestly, I'm going to be very honest with you guys. I would not take the exam until I have completed authors and product manager 1, 2, and 3. That is my professional opinion. Okay, take that however you'd like, but I just want you guys to know that that's probably, some really sound advice that I would really take. Okay, so make sure to finish those 3.
I agree.
And yes, for sure, and the authors for that exam. So just some good information there for you guys. Okay. All right, perfect. So that's where we're at, guys. Just so you can see kind of where we're at, what's going on, what's going to be coming up this next week. And so let's go ahead and just continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, also, there's no login reg for the JavaScript exam. So it's just a CRUD on whatever exam you get. So that's a reliever for those who came to Python. No login reg, just do the CRUD there. Exam.
Yeah, for sure. So some of you guys might be worried when we get more to the exams, you'll get to see some more information about them. But one of the first things that I kind of get is, hey, is there login registration? We haven't covered login registration. You know, I'm freaking out. Like, do I have to learn this? You will be able to get a black belt without the login registration. Okay. There is some things that's going to ask you to do. You get to choose 2 out of 5 different options. And if you can complete those 2 out of 5 different options, you are able to get the black belt. Now just make sure that you also deploy, right? All right, so that is that information there. We'll cover more on the test as we get closer to the test. You'll get a lot more information. So don't be too worried about it, okay? All right, let's see. The exam, what time would the exams begin? So you're going to get the exam code on Friday, so November 4th. You'll get that code if you have 90% of those core assignments. Now, even if you have those done, but you haven't finished these, or I think it's authors and these 3, trust me when I say you need those. And trust me. Okay. Cool, very good questions. Nice. All right, so let's go ahead and just continue moving forward now that we've covered that really, really important information. On to our good things for today, guys. Good things are super important just to keep us motivated and let us remember we're doing this for a reason. There's going to be times where we get stuck, and I guarantee you some of you guys have got stuck this weekend and probably got frustrated, and that's okay. We're all going to get stuck. We're going to be coding along. Essentially, what we're doing is we're problem solvers. We are solving problems at all times, okay? So sometimes it can get hectic. Stand up, walk around, get a little bit of that mental health time. So super important, okay? Quote for today is, if you get tired, and I love this quote, if you get tired, learn to rest and not to quit. One more time. If you get tired, learn to rest, not to quit, okay? It's a great quote, right? Sometimes we get so tired, we're like, okay, I'm done. Just rest, right? Come back at it. All right, cool. So let's start with our warm-up questions, not too terribly difficult today. What verb is used to get read-only data from the server? Which library are we using to listen for requests? And how do you pull information from the request body using Express, right? Nothing too terribly crazy. Those are the 3 questions. Let's see if I can find some lo-fi, and then we will get started. Or you can start already, but I'm gonna find some lo-fi for us. And YouTube knows the first thing that pops up, it's like lo-fi. Little forewarning to everybody today for our activities at the end. I want to make sure that you guys have most of the information. So just make sure to have a server created and kind of code along today with us so you can understand the schema and the model. Oh, thank you, Brian. I just want to repeat that, so in case you weren't able to hear, Just a little bit of information for you guys. Just make sure that you guys are able to have a folder open with the server.js inside of it so that we can get started and just finish that off really quickly so that when we get to the activities, you have something already and it's not as difficult. Okay? Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, let's take a look at these responses. Request method express the app.get function. Get express request body. Get express request body. Get request post. Get Axios. Get express request body. Okay. So what verb is used to get read only? Yeah, for sure. Get. Which library are we using to listen for requests? So let's take a look at these responses. We have express, express. Think about this, okay? Think about this, and this brings up a really good point. Well, Axios is on the front end, right? Axios is on the front end. That doesn't listen for requests; it sends out requests, right? And so we have to think about if it's not Axios, what is it? It's Express, right? It's listening for those. It's listening for those.
Hey,
requests.
Robert, your
Yes.
audio,
Too
your
loud.
audio is kind of messing up a bit.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, I guess something like it was weird. So sometimes like your voice would be a little bit louder,
Mm-hmm.
and then the music would go, and then it'd come back, and then your voice be lower. I don't know, but it was going on for a minute, so I was
Okay.
letting you know.
Nice. So is it better now, guys?
Yeah, 100%.
Nice. Jonathan, is Express a library? I believe so. Yeah, we could look it up real quick. Express. Let's see what it is.
Library.
No, it's a web framework. Yeah, it's a web framework. So not a library. I need to fix that one. So this one should say something else.
Yeah, that one kind of threw me off a bit too.
Yeah, that's on me, guys. Cool. And then how do we pull information from the request body using Express? And then we saw request.body. Absolutely correct, right? Perfect. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and continue to move forward with today. Really good answers. Let's take a look. Today is actually really exciting, right? Database is what brings a lot of power to our applications, okay? So we're going to talk about database, MongoDB, and Mongoose. So super exciting day today. So need to know, these are some things that we really need to understand and how they work. So we're going to start with the database. Okay, some of you guys might know this information. Some of you guys might need a little bit of a rerun. So whatever the case may be, we're going to go through it all, okay? Number one is going to be a database, right? A database is a organized collection of data. Some examples of databases that you may encounter in your life are a telephone book, TV guide, right? We have a bunch of information saved somewhere. Essentially, that's what it's a fancy way of saying it's a set of information, right? Let's see, what is a telephone book? Honestly, right? No, we just have our cell phones and we're like, all the contacts are here. And then when I lose my phone, I could just say, or I can just go to Apple or whatnot and just connect it and it gets all my contacts. Yeah, for sure, a lot nicer than telephone books, but telephone books have their place. So for sure. It's too funny. So moving on. So we have what a database is. The next one is a SQL and NoSQL databases. SQL is relational. NoSQL stands for, or is non-relational, not only SQL, right? Data, structured data stored in tables. So you guys that have played with SQL already, you know that everything had a lot of relationships, right? And you had to look at everything in a relationship. This is connected here. This is connected here. What's the relationship? For the NoSQL, like the one we're working on now, it's unstructured. There's no relationship. It's a JSON file. There's a lot more dynamic and flexible, but that could bring a lot of problems as well later on. So just something to note there, right? Schema, a SQL is static, whereas NoSQL is dynamic. You can change it. Scalability, vertical versus horizontal. So more servers versus just adding more storage to the server, so on and so forth. Structured query language, unstructured query language. One's structured, one's unstructured. Just a few other things you can take a look at all these. Let's move up. Sorry, This thing was in the way. You guys can't see it because it's on Zoom, but yeah. So a lot of other, great information. The differences between SQL and NoSQL. The most important thing though is this right here: is how the um, the information is stored, right? So if you've already gone through Python and you played with some SQL, you'll know that you had databases, you had tables, and you had relationships between these tables, and these tables had rows, and these rows had different columns holding the different attributes, right? With a MongoDB, we have a database still, but now instead of tables, they're collections, right? So we have different collections. And inside of those collections, we have documents, right? So when you create something, it's a document instead of a row of information. And then those documents have fields, right? Those key value pairs that you see are fields, okay? Now, kind of moving forward, some MongoDB queries to know. db.users.find, that's going to be the collection found in users. The query is like age, okay, is it greater than 18? That's what the money sign GT stands for. And then name 1, address 1. Limit 5, giving you only 5 back. These are MongoDB queries, right? So this is how they look. Now, you're going to be doing something a little bit nicer, right? So this is its own language in itself. Now imagine that you can use JavaScript to do a lot of these things for you, right? So Mongoose jumps in to help you out, right? And so Mongoose, what is Mongoose, right? So looking at ORM versus ODM, right? So we've played with an ORM if we've taken Python, which is that object relational, is it modeling object? Let's take a look what it was. I believe it was
Object relational mapping.
Mapping, yes. Option relational mapping. So the other one is going to be object document mapping, I believe it is. But those are the differences. One works with documents, the other one is relation. Okay. We're going to separate our routes and logic for what we want to happen when our route is called upon. We're going to use a schema and a model. Okay, a Mongoose schema defines the structure of the document, the default values, validations. Side note, that's a cute picture for sure, right? Threw in that Mongoose in there since we'll be using Mongoose, make our life a lot easier. We'll be able to validate using Mongoose. Whereas a Mongoose model provides an interface to the database for creating, querying, updating, deleting records, right? So there's 2 different things that we're going to be creating with Mongoose. You're going to see it here in a second. We're going to create a schema and a model. The schema is the structure. The model is going to be what actually interfaces with the database, okay? So we'll see that here in a section. In a second, pretty cool stuff, honestly. Using something that's going to look more like JavaScript or using JavaScript versus something like this, okay? All right, so this is kind of the way it all works, the request response cycle. And these slides right here are super important. I want you to take a look at these slides and really pay attention because these slides are kind of talking about how that full stack application is going to be working, which these are honestly really good slides, okay? Now, you see that we have a client here, and I'm going to go ahead and annotate here. Let's see, we have a client and we have a server. We kind of know what the client is because we played with the client and now we're playing with the server, right? So we know these 2, right? Now, this is the cool stuff here, okay? You're going to notice that you see Axios, right? So we see Axios. We know that we used Axios on the client side. And we know that we used it to make requests, right? So we make requests. So how do these, what's the relationship between these? Well, I want you to take a look at this. Okay. Take a look at this. Okay. This is our verb. This is the endpoint. Okay. This is our verb. This is the endpoint, right? Essentially, this is the verb and that's the endpoint, right? So what it's doing is the Axios is saying, okay, I'm going to go ahead and make a request. And this is listening for a GET request to this specific endpoint, okay? Once it receives it, it runs this function that takes in request response. And then it does some logic inside of here, okay? Now remember, these are disconnected. One's happening in the front end, one's happening in the back end, right? This one it's going to run animal.find. This right here is using mongoose. Look how nice that looks, right? Animal.find, right? So it's very easy to read, right? We know that we are trying to find something saved in animal, right? And so then this, it doesn't have any specific thing it's searching for. So because it doesn't have any specific thing it's searching for, guess what's going to happen? Any guesses what's going to happen if I just say find and I just kind of, it's almost like doing, well, I guess that's a horrible way of trying to describe what I'm saying. This guy right here, if you played with some SQL, what am I doing there? Finds all, Carlos. Very good. Yes, finds all. Gets all the information, right? So essentially it's saying, look, I want you to find, and then it's like, find what? Well, it's like, well, you didn't give me anything, so I'm just going to find all of them. And so that's exactly what it does. It finds every single one of them. So that's going to be kind of that wild card, so to speak. Okay. All right. So let me take off this little thing. All right. So taking, oh, it's still on. Sorry. Sanitation tool sometimes throws me off. Sorry about that, guys. So the second one, you're going to notice the same thing. You're using Axios. It's going to be getting some specific information, listening for a get, specific information, and then it's going to do some work, request response, animal.find one. Okay, let me take off these annotations so you can read that. And now it's finding one using this parameter called ID. So kind of the first things that we see when we're looking at the ID, we say, hey, why does it have an underscore ID? That's a little confusing to me. I'm not entirely sure what's happening. You're going to see here when we create one that it's going to have Mongo is going to have an ID kind of creator that's going to create the ID for us. Okay, we're going to take a look at that. And when it gives us that kind of like key value pair, it's going to be underscore ID. Okay, that's why when we refer to it, we must refer to it like that. Okay, so that being said, you're finding one. Okay, what are we going to use? We're going to use the request params ID. What does that mean? We're using request params ID. Okay, then does then dot catch. Well, hopefully you noticed by now we're using dot then dot catch, dot then dot catch, dot then dot catch. What does that make this? What is this returning? Anybody know? Send it in the chat if you know. What's it doing? What's it doing? Nice, very good, very good. A promise, right? Very good there. The then or catch, absolutely correct. It is returning a promise. So when we do animal.find one, animal.find, animal.create, it's returning a promise. So it's saying, hey, this has been completed, this is pending, or this just as we were not able to complete this. There's been an error, right? And no problem, Jonathan. Yeah, I probably didn't completely explain what I was asking there. So yeah, for sure. Just saying that, you know, it has a dot then, has a dot catch. So meaning that this must be a promise. And so it's a promise. So being that it's a promise, we'll use the dot then dot catch to respond with some type of information. Now, remember the dot catch catches our errors and our dot then sends the response. So that being said, you can set the responses, the catches, to be things such as, hey, you know, we had an error when you looked for this specific request params ID. Maybe that means that we don't have one. So we can think of a response sending a 404, right? Not found. Resource not found. Okay. So on and so forth. And so this is why this kind of slide is so very important, is because we can now see the full picture, right? Taking a look at this next slide here. Just breaking it down so that you can see one, so it's not super confusing, right? Essentially, that's all it's doing. Axios is requesting information. Express is listening for that something to ask for information on this specific endpoint, and then it runs some bit of code inside there. And essentially, this is where it makes that connection to the database using Mongoose. With animal.find, which connects to MongoDB, is able to get the information, and then it responds with the information. Okay. So yeah, let's see, then move this out of the way. I can move to the next slide, move this up. And so all these, you're going to notice that there's different ones. So this one was a get. We covered the get. That's a get. This is the post. So the post is the creation, right? Probably the most important is creating new users or creating some type of new resource on the web, on the web application. App.post, we know how to use app.post. We used it already. It takes the request.body, right? We know that. But look at how we're using Mongoose, right? It says animal.create, and it creates the specific animal by taking that request body. Gives you a response if it was good to go, and it catches if there was an error. Okay. Now, here you see that there's only a console log. There's actually an error if you just do a console log. Can anybody tell me why? Why would there be an error when you are asking for information from a server and instead of responding with some JSON, it console logs an error? It has something to do with this. Correct, Mr. Teets, right? That the client wouldn't be able to see that. And also, if Axios is requesting information, it's still waiting for a response. And the response that it's waiting for, exactly, Oscar, there is no response, right? The response never gets there. So it would just go in circles and in circles and in circles, and it would say, yeah, there was an error, maybe connecting to the database, it'll throw some error, right? And so we do have to understand that you have to send some type of response from the server in order for us to know on the front end kind of what's going on. Okay. The next one is the update one. You're going to notice some things running in here. Okay. So let's go ahead and annotate those. On update, we see a little bit different setup, right? Find one and update. We take an ID. Oh, this is our request body. Okay, okay, so I can take a guess here and be like, okay, this is going to be for my update. Oh, but we see this something that says new true and then run validators true, right? What does this do? These are options, right? These are options. And by doing these options, what you're actually doing is you're going to be returning the updated information instead of the old information. And then the run validators true is that it will actually validate when you update. So if you remember we haven't done it yet, but if you remember, we did validations in the front end. We haven't done them in the back end, right? We did them in the front end, but remember I said, we're going to do validations in the back end, and those are going to be the ones that are going to show. This is where this comes to play. The run validators true. This allows validations to not only happen upon the creation, but also upon the edit, right? So that is that. Okay, I'm going to pause real quick right there. And I know I've covered quite a bit of information, but I want to see if you guys have any questions before we actually start to code this out and probably jump into every section a little bit deeper. So any questions so far? Please let us know. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about asking questions. There's a lot of people that want to ask questions. Don't be afraid. So give me some zeros or ones, 0.5s. How are we feeling? Do we understand this? Do we not understand this? How are we feeling about this information? I like that, Brian. Honest answer. Very cool, very cool. Missing any responses. Okay, cool. All right, perfect. All right, awesome. So let's go ahead and start playing with it, right? And I think that's what the most important part is to play with it and take a look at this. So one thing I want to mention though, before we start playing with these things, I know you saw some things here, like find when an update, and the other one add create, and so on and so forth. And you might say, well, where is this coming from? Is this something that comes from JavaScript? Does JavaScript have these special words? No, this is coming from Mongoose. And so looking at Mongoose, right? This is Mongoose, the documentation. And this is going to be all in the dashboard. So don't freak out and be like, oh, I have to go read the documentation to understand how this works. No, it walks you through it in the dashboard, okay? It walks you through the code. But if you wanted more information, you can take a look at this and read through it, right? This is the database, or not the database. This is what's connecting to the database, kind of like that middleman between you and the database, making some changes for you, or being able to ask for information from the database. Okay, this is that ODM. Okay, so this tells you how to define your schema. Right, it says everything in Mongo starts with a schema. Each schema maps to MongoDB collection and defines the shape of the documents within that collection. Right, so documentation tells you that. You can read through it. As you read more, you say, okay, creating a model. To use our schema definition, we need to convert our blog schema into a model we can work with. So then it tells you how to do that. And then it says, by default, Mongoose adds a _ID property to your schemas. Okay, perfect. Okay. When you create a new document, this with the automatically added _ID property, Mongoose creates a new ID of the type object ID to your document. Cool. So we have our ID creation, right? So if you read forward and you continue to read forward, you'll run into all of these things we're discussing, right? So you have schemas, connections, models. Take a look at the models. It says, okay, we have models. And then as you're going down through these models, you'll see the create. You'll see this is under constructing documents, because remember, we're no longer creating tables, we're creating documents. Okay. Next is querying, right? Asking for certain information. Finding, right? Find by size small, right? Where created date is greater than 1 year ago, so on and so forth. You can do all these things, right? Deleting, delete one. Updating, says update one. There's other ways to do it. So find when an update, you can click on that one. So essentially all the documentation is here. Now the dashboard, when I say dashboard, I'm talking about the learning platform. Okay. It's gonna show you all the ones that you need to be using. But if you ever needed to do something custom, you're working on your own project, you want to read more into it, understand it at a deeper level, the documentation is here for you to read, right, and understand it. Okay. All right, perfect. So that being done, we're going to go ahead and just kind of start from the get-go. Do you want to delete trash? Do you want to delete permanently? That's fine. Okay. So now that we've gone through all that information, let's actually play with it a little bit and kind of code together, because this is what you should have at the end, right? Should be able to understand at the end. So this is just a blank server folder that's going to house all of our server information. Okay, hopefully we're all familiar with this. First thing I'm going to do, I could do npm init. I'm not going to do that because it fills out some things that I don't want it to fill out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a server .js file that's going to house my information. And then I'm going to go ahead and then initialize that node package manager with the -y. That's going to say, I need you to say yes for everything. Kind of like what we do on our phones when they say, hey, would you like to, agree to these new terms? And you're like, yeah. And we don't know what's going on, but that's exactly what it's doing. Okay. All right. So we have the server, we have a package.json. Cool. What does the package.json show? My server, so scripts, server.js. If you remember here, we change this to something else. What do you guys think that is? Send in the chat if you remember what this is. What do we change this to? We need to change this to something. We remember what that is. Nice. Very good. Carlos. I like that. The first one. Nodemon. Okay. It's not just because we want to and because it sounds cool. It's because it restarts every single time we make a change. Okay. Now we can go to our server. But before we start playing with our server, what we need to do in the terminal is, let's clear it real quick. We need to install a few dependencies that we know we're going to be using. Okay. npm I for install. We know that we are going to need Mongoose, right? Because we just talked about it. And we are going to need to install Express. Okay. Let it do its thing. As you know, my computer's slow, so it's going to take a little bit of time. So give it just a moment. Nice. Carlos coming in with Express. I like that. Carlos, if you can paste that, if I'm trying to use the JSON and all that, if you could paste that little section, if you remember, it was like app.use, if you have that. Nice. All right, so I know there was a URL encoded, true, I think there's a few others. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Let's see. I'm going to try to code everything not too fast, just so you guys can all be at the same pace so that you guys have this at the end of today's class. Okay. Nice. Thank you, Carlos. So Carlos has sent two things in, and we're going to talk about those. If we don't remember the app.use express.json, it doesn't let you play with some JSON if you don't have that, meaning that it won't be able to pull the data from the request.body because it's JSON. Okay. Express.url encoded. We're not encoding any URLs right now, but if we were, we would use that. Okay. Awesome. So from the get-go, just real easy, we're going to start with const express is equal to require express. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to say const app is equivalent to express. Okay. Okay. Perfect. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say const port is equal to 8000. Perfect. I'm going to do app.use, and just like Carlos said, we're going to say express.json. Perfect. And we're going to do app.use, and I'm going to do just a copy and paste here. Okay. Awesome. So kind of just importing everything that we need, getting everything situated, setting a name of port to the port so that we can use the word port instead of having to use 8000, right? And so then we can say, okay, app.get. This is going to be our first kind of test, right? And this is going to be to the /API route, and then our request response. This is the function running request response is equivalent to, we're just going to do this right here. And then we're going to do a quick response in JSON. This is just testing everything out. So we're just testing everything out right now. We want to make sure that everything's working. Hi. So we're going to do that. Okay. And so this is going to make sure that everything's working before we get started. And last but not least, we're going to do app.listen to port. And then we're going to do some function that's just going to do a console.log. We're going to be console logging locked and load on port, money sign, curly braces, port. Explorer just a bit dusty. Say Explorer is just a bit dusty on my computer. Isn't Explorer gone? Is Explorer still here with us? Oh, Windows Explorer. Nice, nice. All right, so let's go ahead and get this to run real quick. So we've set everything up, right, before we start playing with Mongoose. We're just going to test to make sure that this is working, okay? npm start. All right, so we see locked and loaded on port 8000, and we're going to do a quick little GET request to make sure that everything's working. Send it off. Let's see what happens. Okay, message hi. Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna take a quick pause there, see if there's any questions so far. I did want to mention I did hear some really good responses. I got to read them. If you guys need me to stop at any point in time, slow down, please let me know. This is why we say ones and zeros, see how you guys are doing, just to see where we're at. But I do need some type of response. If I'm going too quick, want to make sure you guys can slow me down and say, hey, I need to make sure we can go over the material again. So I want you guys to understand that I kind of go based on how the responses are from you guys. So if you guys aren't responding, I feel like you guys are good to go. So I'll continue moving forward. But if there's at any point in time a need for me to slow down, please let me know in the chat. Let us know so I can slow down, go over the information again. Okay. So just please keep me posted. What's up, Jonathan?
I do have one quick question. It was kind of related to something I had seen posted inside the Discord, where, so for example, somebody who's using like Faker, and it gives you an error, something about modules where if you try to import Faker, it says, oh, you can't import outside of a module, but instead you're able to do like the const in the require, and it works. I guess I was still a little confused about that. I just basically swapped them out and it worked, but I don't know if that really ties in here or not.
Yeah, for sure. So when we set this up, it's going to be a const. In order to have this be different, like an import, there's a few other things that we have to set up for an import to work. And so this is why it does not work when you try to use import and you like Faker. I know there's some type of setup to get it to work with import, but it does not. It's not from the get-go. It's not something that's just kind of set up. And so that's why we use const. So const Faker, and then we do the require wherever it's coming from. Sometimes also the modules themselves, there's actually various things being exported, not just one. So another problem that we can encounter is instead of saying const Faker, it would be const curly braces Faker, and then is equal to require the specific dependency.
I thought it had also something to do with like ES5 syntax versus like ES6. I mean, I vaguely remember reading something like that, but don't quote me on it. But I wasn't sure because in like React is more ES6 syntax, but you can use ES5. But I don't know if like Node is only for, not only, but it's used primarily for like ES5 syntax. And you have to like configure it to use ES6, which is like the import stuff. I don't know.
I believe so. I know there's some configuration, and it will tell you that too. Like if you set it up and you say something like, I think there's a different syntax for when you import it. I think it's like this, if I'm correct. Usually it does. It'll tell you something here, and you're correct. It'll say something about ES6, ES5, but I know there's a specific setup to get import to work. And so that's why this is working right now. Now you'll see import working on React, but they have something set up for that to work. Yeah, for sure, Jonathan. So going back to this, Rick, just kind of going and continuing on. So we have app.get, we're going to /API, and we see the message hi, so perfect, everything is connected, right? So it's going well, right? Good to go. We have the connection, right? You can see at the very bottom, we have locked and loaded on port 8000. The next thing is we're going to try to connect to Mongoose, right? So we have the first route set up, perfect. Now we also know that we're going to try to make a CRUD application, which means that the first thing we're going to try to do is create. The next thing that we're going to try to do is going to be read, okay? Now we know that we have Mongoose, and later we're going to modularize it where all this stuff isn't just on server, but today we're actually going to also say const Mongoose is equal to require Mongoose, okay? We're going to be using Mongoose in the server so that we can create those models, the schema and the model, and we can also connect to our database. Now, the database right now is living on my computer. You can also, if you're using Atlas, it's going to be living on somebody else's computer. There's a very simple way of just changing one little thing and it'll connect as well. And we'll talk about that here today, okay? All right, so here's going to be my create route. And then right after we do that, we'll start creating the Mongoose little setup up here, okay? The create route is going to be app.post, and app.post is going to have a specific route API. We're going to be creating a user today. So we're going to say user, and then we're going to have the same thing, request response, which is a function. And then a response.json is going to be some type of information coming back. And when we get there, we'll get there, okay? So before we do this, we actually have to create the user. This is where Mongoose is going to come in. Mongoose is going to have that conversation with MongoDB and essentially make the user inside of, or it's going to make the document inside of that collection, okay? So let's go ahead and do just that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some space here so I can actually start playing with Mongoose. I'm going to bring this down so you guys can see all the code. And I'm going to go ahead and start with const. I'm going to call this user schema. So as you already can see, I'm starting off with the schema, right? The structure of what I'm making. And this is going to be equivalent to a new mongoose dot capital S schema, parentheses, curly braces, okay? This is going to be the structure, okay? So I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to give it an email. I'm going to give it a password, okay? And then I'm just going to say string, 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 okay? This is saying I'm going to go ahead and create a name with a type of string, email with the type of string, a password with the type of string. Perfect, okay? Nothing too crazy, just very basic, okay? The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use this inside of a model. So now I have to create the model itself. So I'm going to say const user, this is the model itself, is equal to mongoose dot model. Model is going to take in a name. It's going to be called user. And it's going to take in a schema, user schema. And honestly, if I'm being quite honest, this should actually look like this, if I'm correct. And I believe this is how the dashboard has it as well. User schema. Okay. And now we're going to use this guy right here to be able to create the users and so on and so forth. Okay. So the first one is we're going to create a user, API / user, creating the user. We're going to say user dot create parentheses. And here we're going to take the request.body, okay, to make a specific user. Now you might ask, where did you find create? This is in the documentation, right? When you go through the documentation or in the learning platform, right? You'll see that it talks about using create. You could also use save, but save is a little bit more. You have to do a few more things when you use save. So just create is the easy one to use. Okay. So we're going to say user.create request.body takes the request.body, and this is a promise. So being that it's a promise, right? The beautiful thing about promises is that it either is accepted, right? It works, it goes through, no problems, or it is rejected. Dot catch. Okay. What does this mean? Well, this means that, hey, if the user creates a user and they have all the proper information that I am requiring, I will create a user. Okay. And since we created a user, well, we need our front end to know we just created a user. So my response is going to send them the user so that they have that user, right? So that they know that it's been created. Catch, well, that means that we had an error, right? We need to respond with the error itself. Now we can, it depends on, this little setup is completely up to you how you want to do it. I like to set it up like this. And I also like to send in the error. And you could just do it like this because it's the same thing. They're similar, ES6, so I'll just do this. Okay. All right, perfect. So this is my create. Okay. We no longer need this guy. The response is already being given. So this is my app.post. It's listening for a post request on this specific endpoint. If that matches, I will run this function. Request response takes in request response. User.create using the model we created up here and creating a document using the request.body or the information, the JSON located in the request.body. And then it gives us back the user. And how does it do that? It responds with JSON and it sends us the user in JSON format. And if we sent in something incorrect, it's going to catch it to say, okay, you have an error. It's going to send us this error. We're going to receive this message with the error itself. Okay. Any questions right here before we move forward from there? Nice. Very cool. All right, awesome. So let's go ahead and test out that first thing. Okay. We have /API users or user. What did I say? Why do I keep saying user? We're creating users, right? So let's go ahead and put it to users, and let's go ahead and use Postman. Why do we use Postman? So we don't have to create the whole front end, right? We could just do it right here relatively quickly, test out our paths, those specific endpoints, and then make those changes there. Okay. All right, so I will then be posting to API /users with the name, email, and password. And let's see what happens. And I'm sure something's not going to work, and hopefully somebody can see that. Let's see what happens. You have a bunch of something, right? It's not doing something, right? It'll cancel out by itself. What we didn't do is we set all this stuff up. We have a model, we have a schema, but we never connected to our database. Okay, so we have mongoose. Sorry, mongoose. All right, let's see, mongoose.connect. This is what's actually going to connect. Now, this is the first section where we run into some errors, and depending on your computer. Mine throws an error, yours might not. So we're going to go ahead and do MongoDB. I believe it's localhost where the error is found. And then we're going to call this one my super cool database. Okay. Hopefully you can notice that right here is where you can change this to be a variable that you can set up here, kind of like we did to port. And so you can change this one. Okay. This returns a promise. So .then, .catch. If we have a successful connection, I would like to console log, because we don't need to send this information to the front end. We just need to know ourselves. We're going to console log that, no, not process. Successfully connected to the database. Okay. And upon the catch, we're going to go ahead and receive an error. And right here, we can say console.log. Error connecting to the database. Here. Okay, perfect. All right, so let's give it a go now. Let's see. Before we give it a go, let's take a look at the terminal and see what it tells us. We're doing its thing. It's loading. It's loading. It's loading. We see locked and loaded on port 8000. Perfect. But we need to see one more. Remember, I said you might receive an error. I want to take a look at that error that pops up. Takes a little bit. Sorry, guys. Okay. Error connecting to the database. Connection, error connection refused. Okay. If you see that, change localhost to 127.0.0.1. Okay. 127.0.0.1. And now you're going to see locked and loaded on port 8000, successfully connect to the database. If you didn't have a database with this name, it will automatically create a database for you. Okay. Now I can send this information and let's see if everything works fine. Perfect. We sent the information and look at our response. We have some other cool little key value pairs here, right? We have name, email, password, which we already knew we sent in, but now we have an underscore ID, right? That ID was created for us. And then we have this version. We don't worry about version, but we do have the ID. So unique ID here, the identifier to identify it, right? So perfect. We were able to create a user. We can create various users, right? Say Bob. And I guess the email was incorrect for the other one. So we created now Bob. I'm going to say gray. Okay, perfect. So now we have a few in there. So remember last time when we coded and we started coding other stuff, it would delete everything, right? It would restart it. Everybody would be deleted. So let's go ahead and add some more code in here and see if that happens. But before we do, is there any questions so far? I want to take a quick pause, try to slow down, see if you guys have any questions, and then we'll push forward. That's funny. I should have said Miss Gray. I didn't catch myself. All right, cool. No questions. Okay, so let's do the read. So we know app.post. Let's do app dot. We're listening for a get. We're getting API users. That means we should get all of the users. Okay. We are going to do a request response. We're going to take request response in this arrow function. And we are going to use Mongoose to go ahead and query the database. We're going to say user.find using that kind of catch all, right? And .then, we're going to go ahead and do something in the .then. And then the .catch, if there's an error, we're also going to do something there. In the .then, because we received a response, we can take in users because it should be all of our users. And we're just going to respond with some JSON with that specific, I would say users, to see how that data looks like that. And for the catch, because I am efficient, we're just going to copy it and paste it. Efficiency. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and take a look at what happens. We're going to go here. We're going to change this to get users, send. Oh, no. No, it should be good now. Send. And now we get some data back. We get every specific user in an array. I personally don't like how the data looks that way. So I like to do this. It's a personal preference, completely up to you, okay? I like to make those changes, and I'll show you why after this thing does its thing. Okay, I like to make those changes just for me personally, so that when I get the information, I know these are all my users, right? And then I can get the information, right? So just a little bit of a difference, nothing too crazy. Then from here, as you can see in the front end, you could map all this information once it's saved to state, and you can do something with it. Now you have identification, right? We have an ID that we can use to later delete or update or do something else, okay? As we can see here. Take a quick pause, see if there's any questions about that. Questions, comments, or concerns? Okay, so we did half of the CRUD functionality. We'll finish the other half tomorrow. What I want you guys to do today, and this is why I had said kind of follow along, is you're essentially going to do exactly what I just did. And you're going to add those two types of functionalities there, creating and reading, okay? And that is essentially it to understand how to fully use, Mongoose, MongoDB with this. And tomorrow we'll cover using the cloud database, since we didn't get to it today. But that being said, is there any questions before we get started? All right. All right, guys. Well, if there's no questions for everybody online, I want to thank you guys for being here and watching. For everybody here, let's go ahead and get started.